Hello YouTube, how's everyone doing? It's Professional here. Welcome back to my playthrough of Black Ops 2, and we're continuing from where we left off. We are going to be now doing the Afghanistan mission. There's going to be a lot of history to talk about in this part. I'll talk about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, what basically happened in that war, and how that war ended. But anyways, let's customize our class here. What are we going to use? We'll use the Galil on this one. Okay, let's do it here.
I can't figure out Menendez without getting inside his fucking head. Salazar, you grew up in Nicaragua during his rise to power. You know his legends better than anyone. Tell me, why does he hate us so much?
Tu primera guerra fría. As a boy, he witnessed the country's rape and murder his people. 1972, there was a colossal earthquake. His family lost everything. A year later, the only thing he ever loved, his sister Josefina, was crippled in a fire. Raul and his father started over, sold drugs for easy money. They became rich, powerful legends of Managua. The Menendez cartel was all but untouchable, so the CIA took out Raul's father in a US-sanctioned assassination.
Right, so now Menendez fucking hated America and started running guns in Afghanistan for his own private army. CIA got wind of it, went on the hunt for him in Kabul. That was the photo Wood showed us in the vault, remember?
See that handsome bastard? That's me. The ugly one's your father. After Nam. The numbers and all that? I mean, he was one dangerous son of a bitch.
The Contras were also rebels that were in Nicaragua. They were fighting against the Sandinistas, primarily the Sandinistas. They were communists. Nicaragua was basically another proxy war between the Soviet Union and the U.S. The Soviets were funding the Sandinistas, which were, communist rebels, and the U.S. was funding the Contras, which the Contras were basically drug cartels. They were a bunch of gangs that had wanted to establish their own government, and they were heavily involved in the drug trade. And the Contras were pretty brutal, but also the Sandinistas were. So both factions kind of really sucked in the Nicaraguan Civil War.
It's showtime, Mason!
What'd you see, Woods?
Sand. Sand and more fucking sand. Hudson's contact's on his way.
You reckon we can trust the Chinese?
We can't hear. They've been supporting the Mujahideen same as us. They know if Russia was in Afghanistan, they'd be looking at China next.
No one likes the Russians, huh?
You know me. I don't like anyone. You might want to get your head down.
Take it easy, Sal! Deliver the weapons.
Now, what about your end of the deal?
I will take you to the leader of the Mujahideen. He can help you find Raul Menendez. And we have fresh horses. You will follow.
Oh, shit. Let's do it.
Mason,
So-
Hudson, did you make contact with Zhao?
So about this, this is something that a lot of people don't know about. When you typically think of the Mujahideen in the Soviet-Afghan war, you typically think about the U.S. supporting the Mujahideen, giving them Stinger missiles. But a lot of people don't know the U.S. was not the only faction that was funding the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen got most of their funding from the U.S., but there was other factions. China actually funded the Mujahideen heavily. They actually gave them thousands of AK-47s, thousands of RPGs. They gave them training in guerrilla warfare, especially in the Xinjiang province. A lot of Mujahideen fighters would go in there, train with Chinese military officials. And so you're probably wondering, why would China, a communist country, side with the US in Afghanistan against the Soviets under a communist state? The reason for that was because of the Sino-Soviet split. What basically happened was that China and the Soviet Union hated each other. They were two communist superpowers. They were basically fighting over control of the communist world. That's basically what it was about. It was basically a power struggle between China and the Soviet Union. The Chinese, Mao Zedong specifically, really liked Stalin. He was a really big fan of Stalin. He modeled his government heavily after Stalin. After Stalin died, when Khrushchev came to power, Khrushchev had de-Stalinized the Soviet Union, had gotten rid of Stalin's cult of personality, and had arrested a lot of people that were involved in Stalin's government, like Beria, and had them executed. Now, this pissed off the Chinese communists a lot, who really loved Mao, and this basically created that spat that basically happened. And so wherever the Soviets would operate, the Chinese would operate against them specifically. But it wasn't just the Chinese that were funding the Mujahideen. Saudi Arabia was heavily funding the Mujahideen, and also Pakistan. So Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, China, and the US were funding the Mujahideen, but when you really think of history, people only think of the US as the only ones funding Mujahideen, when in reality, it was many countries that were doing it.
We're on our way to the Mujahideen camp now.
I'm sure I don't need to remind you that our presence here must remain 100% deniable. There will be serious consequences if Russia learns of our involvement in Afghanistan.
Yo, that ain't gonna happen.
We must hurry. We believe the Soviets are about to launch an attack on the camp.
Yeah, kick it up again!
This way.
If a Russian attack is indeed imminent, you're gonna need all the help you can get. I've arranged for a couple of specialists to act in an advisory capacity. Here they are now. Rahman, this is Woods, and Mason. My two best men.
We need weapons, not soldiers. This should be good. Just so we're clear, we hold off the Russian attack, you give us what you have on Menendez.
Our base is here.
Any advance will come through one of the narrow passes leading into the valley.
I know this. Our men defend these mountains.
Our weapons will give them an
That's
edge.
a bullshit plan. You're talking about the Russian army here. They come at you with brute force, which means strength in numbers and heavy armor. Are your men ready for that?
They have no experience with the weaponry we brought.
And we do. We belong on the front line.
The Russian assault has begun. Yalla! Yalla, Boromirun!
You have faith in your plans, America.
I got more than faith, Zhao.
Let's rock it.
Okay, so about this, let me talk about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. This is a very strange war. Not a lot of people know about this. But about the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, this happened in late 1979, and it lasted all the way up until 1989, so about 10 years. So in 1978, there was actually a coup in Afghanistan. It was called the Tsar Revolution. And this guy by the name of Nur Muhammad Taraki, if I'm pronouncing his name, came to power. Now, Taraki was a communist official, and he basically established a communist dictatorship in Afghanistan and had declared himself president, leader of the new communist Afghanistan. So Afghanistan was a communist country, and he had allied with the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet government really liked Taraki, but and they pretty much used him as a puppet. They were the ones who had funded the Tsar Revolution, and they supported the coup. Now, what happened is, a year later, this guy called Hafiz Zula Amin. He was Taraki's deputy. He basically gets into a power struggle with Taraki, and they basically had an ideological difference. Amin was also a communist, but Amin wanted these communist policies to go into effect in Afghanistan more harshly. He wanted to implement them quicker, do more forced collectivization. He also had supported going after religions in Afghanistan, which is a big no-no because Afghanistan was a very, very religious country, and because they had this huge spat with each other, what ended up happening is Amin had overthrown Taraki in a coup. Taraki tried to have Amin arrested first, but Amin evaded him. Then Amin basically overthrew him in another coup and had Taraki arrested in prison. Then what they did was they suffocated him with a pillow and killed him in prison. Now, when this happened, the Soviet government, specifically Leonid Brezhnev, who was the general secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, dictator of the Soviet Union, was really pissed because he had liked Taraki. And so what the Spetsnaz did, the Soviet Special Forces, they initiated Operation Storm 333, which happened on December 27, 1979. This is basically the start of the Soviet-Afghan War. And what they did was Spetsnaz had breached the Afghan, presidential palace, and they had assassinated Amin, killed him in an operation. It's one of the most successful special forces operations in Russian history. And what the Soviets did at that point is they installed Babrak Karmal as their new puppet, and then the Soviet army had rolled into Afghanistan. Now, the Soviets were fighting primarily against the Mujahideen, which are these guys in the game. And the Mujahideen, a lot of them were radicals. These were not necessarily good guys. They weren't freedom fighters. They were radicals. They were terrorists. They just did not like the Soviets. They didn't like communism. They hated the state atheism, and so they fought heavily against the Soviets. Now, the Soviets' downfall in Afghanistan, the reason that they ultimately lost, was because the Soviets got overconfident. The Soviets had invaded Czechoslovakia in the past, put down a rebellion. They invaded Hungary, put down a rebellion, and they basically thought that this was going to be a walk in the park. They thought they would go in a couple months, they'd be gone, but Afghanistan was a very mountainous country. They were not used to the terrain. The Afghans were, and the Afghans also, the Mujahideen specifically, were extremely religious, and they would not give up. They were basically ready to fight to the death. They believed they were not scared of death, where in other countries the Soviets invaded, people would surrender pretty quickly because they were just so scared of the Soviets. Mujahideen weren't really scared of the Soviets. They were going to fight till the end. The U.S. started supporting them and specifically gave the Mujahideen Stinger missiles, which turned the tide in their favor, and basically what ended up happening is after 10 years of fighting, the Soviets weren't going anywhere, and then you had Gorbachev, who was new general secretary already for a few years, ended up pulling the Soviets out of Afghanistan in 1989, and then in 1992, the Soviet puppet state in Afghanistan collapsed. The Mujahideen went into their own civil war, and the Taliban had ended a faction that broke away from the Mujahideen, were the ones who actually ended up taking power, and they controlled Afghanistan. And pretty much the end resulting there is the history moving forward. You pretty much know what happened after that. But I will also talk more about the Mujahideen a little bit later in this playthrough, and I'll talk about more stuff that's going on here. But anyways, here, let's go back to the gameplay.
We must hurry! We cannot allow them to enter the valley!
Settle up, Mason.
This may be tougher than we thought. We got hits dropping infantry right in front of the camp.
Lead them to Mujahideen! Just get to the choke points and hold back their armor!
Too fucking close!
Follow me! We got a BTR pushing through the ruins! You need more than a rifle, Mason!
Grab an RPG for the weapons cache.
We cannot let it enter the valley! Another BTR is headed this way!
What do we got in here? Let's see. Mines. Okay.
Try and lay them in the path of the vehicles!
Okay, now about the Stinger missile. The Stinger missile, this is what ended the Soviet-Afghan war. If I had to name, one specific weapon that did the most amount of damage to the Soviets, it was this, the Stinger missile. And about this was a new weapon that was developed this time, and the U.S. had specifically given this to the Mujahideen to fight back against specifically Soviet helicopters, the Mi-24 Hinds. Now, the Hind was the Soviets' greatest weapon in Afghanistan, but it was also their biggest disaster, because the Hind is not just an attack helicopter. When you think of the Hind, you typically think of this big, powerful, Soviet helicopter coming in, destroying everything in its path, but it wasn't just an attack helicopter, it was also a transport helicopter. The Hind actually could carry a number of passengers and could actually transport entire squads. So what the Hind could do is because Afghanistan was such a mountainous country, it was actually easier for the Soviets to get around in helicopter. They would take squads of their soldiers, they would fly around the Hind, drop them off in an area, and then the Hinds would also provide aerial support. Now, the reason that the Stinger did so much damage to the Soviets is because the Hinds did not have any flares, or at least early on in the war. They didn't have any countermeasures. They didn't have any way to fight back against this. And when the Soviets, when the Soviet helicopters started getting hit by this, it started taking them out, and not just the pilots and the attack helicopters, it started taking out entire squads that were in the back of the Hind also ended up dying. And so this really broke the Soviet morale. And basically, when you're a Soviet soldier in Afghanistan and you're hearing about a Hinds being taken out of the sky, out of nowhere, and you don't know if the missile's coming or not, and you hear squads being killed, are you really going to want to get on that helicopter? It's going to destroy your morale. And that had pretty much destroyed Soviet morale at that point. Later versions of the Hind came in with flares, but then the Stinger also got better as well, and could actually counter those as well. And so that was pretty much it, is the Stinger. When the Mujahideen largely had that, and they were just shooting down Soviet helicopters, the war is pretty much over for them at that point. See if that does it. There we go.
Nice work, Mason! The Mujahideen can handle infantry. Mason, put a cratering charge under the archway! Let's make damn sure no more vehicles make it through here.
Charge set!
Come here and blow that crater charge! Are you trying to blow yourself up? Blow it, Mason!
Hudson, the west choke point is secure. Armor ain't getting through this way.
Woods, Mason, they're throwing everything they have at us. We've got threats all over the valley. Hoosier reporting rushing tanks moving in from the north.
Brute force and strength in numbers? You expected such a fight.
Doesn't mean I wanted it!
While the Stingers can be fired manually at tanks. I didn't know about that. Okay.
Hit the tanks!
Hudson, tanks are down!
Scouts report enemy gunships to the north of the valley. Move to engage.
Okay, switch to aircraft lock-on mode. Here we go, okay.
Round those Russian bastards! It's coming down! Bring down those gunships! Hudson! The gunships are grounded!
Russian tanks are advancing north of the valley. Take them down any way you can.
We're on it, Hudson.
That's right.
Get him good, Mason!
Tanks are down, Hudson.
The Russians have overrun the Mujahideen ammo cache to the east. Do whatever is necessary to recapture it. Muller Roman is concerned. He thinks we're losing the fight.
You tell Robin from me I'll give a shit about his concerns. The ammo cache is left of the valley. The path is impassable by horse.
Infantry, fast roping in.
Don't let their feet touch the ground! Shit! You got another BTR rolling up!
Hudson, the ammo cache is ours.
You fight bravely, American!
Mason, return to base. We have a problem.
What kind of problem?
You better see for yourself.
Was one tough son of a bitch.
Bet your ass he was. Kravchenko basically carved a hole in his head and he shoved those fucking numbers in there, and he survived that. No. Mason said he didn't see those numbers anymore, but I don't know. Not so sure about that. Mason, better take a look.
This isn't over yet. The Russians want to give us one last display of brute force. Let's give them one last display of courage. You with me?
fuck? It's fucking Kravchenko. Piece of shit. Of course he's involved in all this.
Kravchenko must die.
Mason is still brainwashed from the numbers, but okay, guys, so one thing I want to talk about the Soviet-Afghan War, something that a lot of people don't know about, and that is that the Soviet Union killed 20 times more civilians in 10 years than the US did in 20 years. That is not an exaggeration. If you do not believe me, you can Google this. Google this. How many civilians did the Soviets kill in Afghanistan? You will be absolutely shocked at the number. So when the US occupied Afghanistan between 2001 and, August of 2021, almost 20 years, close to it, the US killed between 40 to 60,000 civilians. That's at least most records that I've seen. And that's horrible also. Don't get me wrong. And some numbers are, up to 100,000 to the higher, estimates. But most estimates I've seen is between 40 to 60,000 civilians they've killed in 20 years. How many civilians did the Soviets kill in 10 years between 1979 and 1989? Between 1 to 2 million civilians. So even if you take the low number of 1 million civilians that the Soviets killed and you compare that to the US, the Soviets killed 20 times more civilians in half the time, in 10 years, versus the US in 20 years. So why did the Soviets kill so many civilians, compared to the US? Simple reason, it's because the Soviets did not care about human life as much as the United States did. The Soviet Union would use fear tactics, collective punishment in Afghanistan. So in Afghanistan, if there was like a 1 or 2 Mujahideen fighters from a village, the Soviets would raise that entire village. So if there was like 1 or 2 fighters hiding in a village, they would blow up the entire village, call in heavy artillery. They would, use napalm, they did use napalm in that war, call in jets, burn the entire village down. They would send in the Hinds, the attack helicopters, and just raise the entire village to the ground, killing everyone, men, women, children. Everybody in the village would be killed. That is how the Soviets occupied Afghanistan, with brutal fear tactics. There's this movie called Charlie Wilson's War. It's not about the Soviet-Afghan War, but there's one scene in the movie which actually shows Soviet Hinds and how they were actually murdering, killing civilians in those villages. But that's what the Soviets did. It was a terror campaign in Afghanistan. Take a look at this right here on the screen. This is the PFM-1 mine, also known as the butterfly mine, and this is one of the most evil weapons the Soviets used. This was a mine that was dropped actually from helicopters and planes. So they would fly over, villages and, areas in Afghanistan, and they dropped millions of these in Afghanistan, millions. The mine will basically spin, and as it hits the ground, it gets placed. And the mine is actually bright green colored. And a lot of children, they would find this bright green thing in the ground, and they would think, oh, it's a toy, and they would pick it up, and they would get blown up. And this weapon was notorious for killing thousands of Afghan children alone. When the United States was in Afghanistan, we did not use anti-personnel mines. The United States did not do stuff like that. So maybe the United States should not have been in Afghanistan. You could definitely make that argument. But to suggest that the Soviet Union was less worse than the US learned from Vietnam, learned from a lot of the bad things we did in Vietnam, like, Rolling Thunder, and also we, Agent Orange, and we cared much more about civilian life in Afghanistan than the Soviets ever did. So say what you want about the US, but we didn't terrorize people like the Soviets did in Afghanistan.
Couple times, I saw the tick. And I get that look in his eyes, he's scanning the room. Next thing you know, he's talking to the Russian. Fucking Reznov. Good old Tricky Vic.
Woods, maybe I should handle this interrogation.
Maybe you stay the fuck out of my way. I got unfinished business with this bastard.
I left you to rot in Vietnam, Sergeant Woods. You should be dead.
Nobody told me. Buddy Rahman tells me you're doing business with a Nicaraguan named Raul Menendez. What do you do for him? You believe in an eye for an eye? Huh? This is a Mujahideen, baby. They'll bury you up to your neck, peel your eyelids back, and leave you to fry in the desert. I'll take you out quick.
The numbers are still getting to Mason on this.
I sell him weapons.
That doesn't sound too Soviet of you, brother.
The Soviet Union is dying. Money is all that matters.
Where do the weapons go?
Cuba.
You have to really tap it badly.
The Third World.
Why?
Menendez wants to see the world burn.
But that's not gonna happen.
He's more powerful than you know. Even if there's people in the CIA.
Bullshit! This guy's fucking with us.
The fuck are you doing?
Menendez told me you must suffer.
You face piece of shit. We helped you fight the Russians. We're on your side.
No. No, you are and always will be our true enemy. Without water and shelter, you may last a day. If you are strong,
So, we're in a desert buried. The year. Who does your father think rides up on a horse to save us?
Tricky Vic.
Yeah, see? You're just like your old man. No, it wasn't him.
That's not.
Come on, if you think it was him, don't you think he would have stuck around for a bit, huh? Maybe explain some shit?
Also, that was not Reznov, for people wondering if that actually was him, because Reznov has all of his fingers, and actually Reznov is actually missing one finger that he lost in World War II, so that wasn't Reznov. Okay, so here at the end, I wanted to talk about whether it was a mistake to arm the Mujahideen or not. They were the guys who had fought against the Soviets. The US had heavily armed them, supplied them with weapons, and later, you know, we got attacked during September 11th. But anyways, about the Mujahideen, were the Mujahideen freedom fighters? No, they were not freedom fighters. The Mujahideen were terrorists. They were extremists. The Mujahideen were Islamists. Now, there's a lot of people out there that think that Muslims and Islamists are the same thing. They are not. A Muslim is somebody who practices the Islamic religion. They're not violent at all. But an Islamist is somebody who... they are an extremist. They're religious extremists. They believe that Sharia law should be the government. They believe that women should have no rights. They believe in extreme things like, you know, death for people who are gay, you know, stuff like that. That's what Islamists generally believe. And that's what the Mujahideen were. They were, you know, violent extremist terrorists, and they would also, you know, do, you know, suicide bombing attacks. They would do terrorist attacks against their own people. They were not good people. And you can have a war where both sides are bad. So the Soviets were definitely bad, and the Mujahideen were definitely bad as well. But what I will say about it is that no one at the time thought that we would get attacked by, you know, the Taliban, which they later broke away from the Mujahideen. No one thought that we would get attacked, you know, over 20 years after that war had ended. No one, you know, imagined that something like that would happen, that we would be getting attacked and we would have to go halfway across the world. At the time, Afghanistan was getting attacked. The Soviets, like I said earlier in my, you know, part, the Soviets killed between 1 to 2 million civilians in Afghanistan. They'd killed a lot of people. A lot of people died. And, you know, a lot of Americans looked at that and saw the Soviets invading this country, you know, killing so many civilians, and they were very sympathetic to the people in that country. They didn't imagine that, you know, this group would, you know, form a splinter group later on that would end up attacking us. You know, nobody imagined that. But I will also say about this is, if you had, you know, imagine if you had a family member that died in Vietnam. You know, your brother died in Vietnam, your father died, your son died, your best friend died, and the Soviets had supported the Viet Cong in the Vietnam War. So the Viet Cong were a terrorist organization, just like the Mujahideen. And the only difference is they were a communist terrorist organization, but they terrorized their own people, killed civilians, they would torture people, they were just horrible people. And so many Americans had died in the Vietnam War, and this was basically America's revenge. And so at the time is, if you were an American, you would want Soviet blood to spill, especially if you were, especially if you lost a family member or a friend in Vietnam. Because after what the Soviets did in Vietnam, it's very hard for me to feel bad for them, especially after, you know, the horrible things that they ended up doing in Afghanistan. And so, ultimately, was it a mistake arming the Mujahideen? Probably, most likely, yeah. We probably shouldn't have armed them. You know, it's a dangerous extremist group that ended up attacking us later on. But at the time, we were just basically thinking that, you know, they had hurt us really badly in Vietnam. This was a chance to hurt them. And on top of that is, you know, we're also helping the people of Afghanistan. We didn't imagine that they would attack us 20 years later. So that's basically it. Let me know if you guys think it was a mistake or not to arm them or not, but I'm just explaining to you guys the history at that time and what people were thinking in the general mood. But I guess that will wrap up this video. Thank you guys for watching. You know, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. One last thing I wanted to talk about is I actually know a Soviet-Afghan veteran. There was a guy in my town in New York, and that guy is actually a veteran of this war. He was an Uzbekistani man, but Uzbekistan at the time was actually part of the Soviet Union. He had fought in the war. He was a draftee, and he was young when he fought in the war, early 20s. And about the guy is, you know, this guy was like a hardcore communist back in the day. This guy today is a barber, by the way, so it's kind of funny, a former communist, you know, running his own business now. But he was the guy was basically a big communist. He told me he was a big supporter of the Soviet Union. He had a lot of faith in the Soviet Union, when the Soviet-Afghan war happened, he got drafted. The Soviet Union drafted so many people. It's kind of ironic. The Soviets were, you know, saying the Americans were murdering civilians in Afghanistan. That's exactly what they were doing. The Soviets said that the Americans were drafting people against their will and forcing them into Vietnam. Well, that's what the Soviets were doing too. Is they were drafting people against their will and forcing them into Afghanistan. It was a draft, conscription. And I'm not here to defend what America did in the Vietnam War. If you want to watch my Black Ops 1 playthrough, you can see I talked about American war crimes in that entire playthrough. But the point that I'm getting at to you is a lot of the things the Soviets were accusing the U.S. of doing is they were doing themselves. But anyways, about this barber who's in my town in New York. The guy was a hardcore communist, and he talked to me about this war. He told me about how he had feared the Mujahideen. He was scared of them. The Soviets were just terrorized of them, just scared of them. And the guy was also an atheist, and he was just absolutely terrified of getting, you know, caught by the Mujahideen, because they would just do unspeakable things to you if you were a Soviet POW that got captured by them. They would just do absolutely horrible things. But that was it. Is he had lost his faith in the Soviet Union. So this was like a guy who was like a really big communist. He was like a really big supporter of the Soviet Union. He thought that the Soviet Union was a force for good in the world, and when he saw the Soviet Union invading another country, you know, doing these horrible things in Afghanistan, that war gave him extreme PTSD. And also on top of that is just seeing the loss of civilian life, just fighting a dangerous terrorist enemy as well. It was that just took a toll on him. But the guy's not a communist anymore. He runs his own barber shop in my town in New York. I find it kind of funny, a former communist, you know, reformed and is running a business now in America. But that was basically it. That was me, you know, my history talks about this. I know I talked a lot of history on this, but Soviet-Afghan War is a war that not a lot of people know about. But thank you guys for watching. I hope that you guys enjoyed this part. If you did, drop a like, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care, everyone, and have a wonderful day, guys.